It's the All Things Strange podcast. I am your host, Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Patreon, our merchandise, our Discord, and more. This week's episode, False Flags. All right, the timing worked out good on that one. Sometimes I screw it up. All right, as voted upon by our Patreon subscribers, you can check out the link in the description on the Linktree if you'd like to support the show. We've got 3 wonderful tiers for you. The first tier will get you early access and after hours. The second tier will get you bonus episodes. And finally, the third tier allows you to vote on upcoming topics such as this one. All right, false flags. What is it? What does it do? Get it out of my face. That was for ETA. He was supposed to be here, but his air conditioning broke and it is extremely hot where he is. So he is sheltering in a relative's house nearby. He lives in Arizona. So you don't want to be caught without air conditioning in the summer in Arizona. And Agent Ether is gone. She had to drive to the city for some nefarious purpose, I'm sure. So it's just me, and I got to record this. So I'm doing this normally every other week, but this time around I got to do it week to week because in a week or two I'm going to be traveling down south to visit some friends. Maybe I'll talk about that in the after hours. I don't know. Anyways, let's get to it. Here's a definition from Wikipedia. I suppose it's as good as anything. False flag is an act committed with the intent of disguising the actual source of responsibility and pinning blame on another party. And this term originates, as far as I can tell, way back in the 1500s in naval warfare, where it was used the tactic was used by pirates and privateers to conceal their true identity. So basically, they would fly a flag. You know, if they noticed a Dutch trader in the distance, they would keep a spare flag on them, and they would fly a Dutch flag to allow them to get closer. Hey, let's parlay, maybe swap some deck swabbers and some supplies, some sundries or whatever they called it back then. I don't know. And when they get close enough to fire, whoops, sorry, we're not actually from wherever you are. We are pirates, and we're going to get ya. And that was a tactic used way back then, and the term has stayed with us ever since. These days, it's usually used to refer to an event where a country attacks itself for some nefarious purpose, such as gaining popular support for some kind of war or other action. So the definition usually these days is narrowed a little bit, but originally it was just using literally a false flag. Let's get to some of the prominent incidents throughout the years. This is by no means comprehensive. If you're interested in this topic, there are a ton of them. For example, I don't think I'm going to be talking about Operation Gladio, which is that event is probably multiple episodes in and of itself, and I don't think I could do it justice with just a summary, but there were shenanigans in Italy that had long-reaching political consequences. There is a 3-part episode done by alien theorists theorizing about it called, the first one is Operation Gladio, Just the Tip. But I think that's on their bonus feed, which I do support them on Patreon. But that is a good place to start if you're interested in knowing more. Go check them out. Anyways, the first one I'm talking about here is the Gleiwitz incident, and that was a staged attack carried out by Nazi Germany on August 31st, 1939. And this was in the lead up to World War II. The shit had not yet hit the fan. They targeted Sender Gleiwitz, which was a German radio station in Gleiwitz. I guess now it's Gliwice, Poland. So Gliwice, Gliwice, Poland. That's not a Polish accent. Anyways, Nazi forces disguised themselves as Poles, which, fun play on words there. I'm sure there's a good joke there somewhere, right? Poles, I don't know. Stripper poles? What kind of poles? No, Polish people. They don't mean Poles, they mean Polish people. But I guess they're called Poles. Anyways, they stormed the station and transmitted a short propaganda message in Polish. And the idea was to fabricate an attack by Poland on Germany, giving Hitler a pretext for the invasion of Poland that they did the very next day. And this was part of a larger operation that they did similar attacks all over the place. And this was orchestrated by the SS under the codename Operation Himmler. Real subtle there, right? Gee, I wonder who was in charge of this. The attacks were intended to create the public perception of widespread Polish aggression against Germany. And despite them doing these things, it was not really super successful in convincing the international audience, but it didn't really matter because they were going to invade either way. This was just sort of like some pretext to help them get there. But it goes to show you, we're going to go throughout a couple of historical cases and, more modern-ish ones. And it goes to show you that, this was a tactic used over the years, throughout the years, and you could say that it's something that could be used even today. What specific cases? I'll leave that for you to decide. Anyways, the international audience didn't really buy it, and Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939, and that was the beginning of World War II in Europe. This is a very well-documented incident of a false flag operation that was used to attempt to manipulate public opinion and justify military action. Now, it wasn't super successful on the international level, but it probably worked pretty well in Germany where, right away they said, hey, Poland's attacking us, and everybody's like, yeah, let's go get them, right? I don't know. I mean, Hitler was really good at convincing people of stuff that needed to be done that didn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. Now, I mentioned earlier, this was part of Operation Himmler, which was also known as Operation Canned Goods, or Conserve in German, Konserve in German. And like I said, this was a series of operations planned by Nazi Germany in August 1939. And this was, the whole point was to fabricate Polish aggression, which I'm sure was not really a thing at the time. Because, I'm sure Polish people are nice. They don't want to attack Germans. What's the deal here? So this operation began on September 1st, 1939. And the mastermind of the operation was Heinrich Himmler, who was the leader of the SS, or the Schutzstaffel. They implemented this. It was supervised by Reinhard Heydrich, and it was managed by Heinrich Müller. And there were many incidents involved, such as, the Nazis disguised as Poles attacking German installations, like the radio station, and even assaulting concentration camp inmates and dressing them in Polish uniforms to make it look like they were killed by Poles. So did I write Polish? Maybe I meant German uniforms. I think I meant to say German. So they killed some inmates, some concentration camp people. They killed them, put them in uniforms to stage an incident. So, man, the Nazis were savage. Oh my God. And I mean, if you got dead bodies, that's got to be pretty convincing, right? Now, the success of this, just like the radio incident, was not super not super convincing on the international scale, but it convinced the Germans, or at least, at least it was a pretext, and they very shortly thereafter invaded Poland. And here's a quote from online. Operation Himmler is a chilling example of how totalitarian regimes can manipulate events to create a pretext for war. Yeah, I mean, a lot of regimes have done this. A lot of governments have done things like this. Not necessarily ones we would consider to be totalitarian, although it's always nice to point the finger, isn't it? uh, we don't know exactly how many attacks were done under Operation Himmler. The records are a little murky, but we do know about the radio station. We do know about killing prisoners from concentration camps and putting them. It was Polish uniform. So putting them. Looking further down on my notes here, I guess I got mixed up there. So the victims were dressed in Polish uniforms to portray them as Polish attackers killed by Germans to make it look like Poland was actually invading. And we don't know exactly who these people were that were murdered or where they came from. But there are mentions of Dachau and Sachsenhausen. It's, one of those sad things where these people were just used for their bodies and murdered, and we don't even know who they are, really. I don't think the records were kept of that. They weren't people to the Germans. They were just like, animals to be slaughtered. And there were also, so those were used in staged border attacks against Germany. And some of the attacks were SS troops disguised as Polish troops firing on outposts, causing some casualties on the German side to again strengthen this narrative. And it's kind of strange because from what I understand, Hitler had the country behind him at this time. Maybe he didn't, though. I'd have to look at my history because I know at one point I think he declared a state of emergency and kind of took over the entire government, whereas before that there was like a parliament and stuff, so he didn't have total control. And maybe this is what allowed him to become a dictator, right? So this is a summary, but maybe in the context of history, maybe these events are actually super important for inside of Germany because, without these false flag attacks, maybe Hitler would not have been able to successfully convince people to invade, and maybe he would not have been able to seize total control of the government. I'd have to look at that. Right, for this episode right here, we're just doing brief summaries of all these events because I wanted to do multiples of them rather than just one. But yeah, each one of these things is probably a case file in and of itself. But the main idea here was to manipulate the media. I guess, in portraying an event that didn't really happen, which is basically false flag, right? Pretty wild stuff. All right, let's get on to one that happened a little bit before that. This is, I'm not sure if this is a hard false flag. There is a false flag element to it, but I thought this was just such a fascinating story that I wanted to include it anyways. And this is the 1914 Battle of Trendade. All right, so we got two major players here. We have the German ship, the SS Cap Trafalgar, Trafalgar. I think that's something from, I don't know, mythology or something. And the British HMS Carmania. Carmania. Carmania? That sounds like a Spanish word to me. Anyways, these were both cruise ships, passenger ships that had been converted for the war effort. We're talking World War I here. Now, there was a secret supply base on Trendade Island in the South Atlantic Ocean. That was a German supply base, and the British probably had a theory that there was some shenanigans going on around there since there were shipping lanes being attacked as part of the war. So they went looking for it after retrofitting or fitting, converting the Carmania to a warship with guns. Oh, I can't talk. Excuse me. I apologize. Anyways, the interesting thing about this incident, though, is that the German ship Trafalgar was actually disguised as the Carmania. So they were trying to do a false flag so they could disguise it as the Carmania passenger ship and use that to attack other ships without being, detected early on. So they could, I guess, in the ocean, these things are not going 500 miles an hour. So if you see a ship on the horizon, it's going to take you a while to get there. And if they can tell from a distance that you are a bad guy, it's going to be very difficult to catch up to them. But if you look like a friendly passenger ship that might even be able to help you in some way, then you could probably get very close to them. Now, the armaments were pretty similar. They both had, if I remember, I didn't notate it, but I think they both had like 8 guns each. So for a big giant cruise ship, that's not that much. It doesn't seem that much to me anyways. We went, I think we talked about this before in After Hours or something, but we did do a tour of a battleship, like a World War II era battleship on the East Coast. And that thing was armed to the friggin' teeth. Like everywhere you turn around, there was a gun somewhere on that ship. It was pretty wild. It was kind of breathtaking just how much death and destruction they were able to pack onto that boat. But this was not the case here. They had probably 4 guns on each side, or maybe 3, and then 1 in the front and 1 in the back. So not that much as far as modern warfare goes. But they lacked modern ammunition loading techniques like, winches and cranes and that kind of thing. There's a very crude system where they had to hand carry all of the ammunition from storage up to the guns. So as a result, they were not able to fire that quickly. And this battle was more on par with like an old school, like a ship battle, like from, I don't know, from like, the online, it says like from Admiral Nelson's time, wooden ships, right? With cannons and cannonballs and stuff. I mean, they had modern guns. They just didn't have a convenient way of loading them. So this battle went on for hours and hours because they just couldn't shoot each other that quickly. So the Carmania saw smoke because these are like steamships, so they got smokestacks. The Carmania saw smoke early in the morning on 14th of September from the Trafalgar, and they knew that they weren't supposed to be there, and they had a sneaking suspicion that something was afoot. So they somehow snuck up on them. I don't know how that's possible. Maybe everybody on the Trafalgar was drunk or something. So, I mean, how can you possibly be sneaky in a huge ocean liner? These are pretty big ships we're talking about here, not like little tiny like rowboats or something. Anyways, they snuck up on them and attacked, but they fired early when they were out of range. And of course, the Trafalgar noticed them and they got the first successful shots off. So the Carmania was the first to take damage. It went on for a few hours, but the Carmania eventually prevailed and won the battle, sinking the Trafalgar. And it got lucky with a shot that it hit below the waterline that caused the Trafalgar to sink, because the Carmania was getting as good as it was taking, as good as it gave. I don't know how you want to say that, but it took a lot of damage, and at the end of the battle, it was heavily damaged and listing in the water, so it was pretty much no longer seaworthy. But they won. Interestingly enough, towards the end of the battle, the German SS Kronprinz arrived in the area, but they suspected a trap for various reasons, which, I don't want to go into because it's kind of a little bit of a side story, but they felt like there was a trap afoot. So the captain decided, nah, we're going to go ahead and sit this one out because we don't want to get wrecked. Because they roll up and there's a ship that appears to be disabled, but that could be a ruse. Anyway, so they left. But had they stayed, they would have easily sunk the Carmania, which was already sinking by itself. Like it was on fire, badly damaged, and barely hanging on by a thread. It was on its last leg. If they had just shot a pistol in the general direction a few times, it probably would have sunk the thing. Anyways, so the Carmania barely escapes by the skin of its teeth, heads south, and, hopefully somebody comes along that will rescue them. And they do have radio communication, so that was a thing. And they're saying, hey, help us, we're sinking, probably, I imagine that's what they said. or they were English, so with an accent. So they went south and they were rescued on the 15th. And if they hadn't been rescued right then and there, their ship probably would have sank like within 24 hours. They would have sunk. So they barely made it. They were barely rescued. And the ship was eventually brought to port, repaired, and ended up serving a couple more years in the war efforts as a patrol ship and troop carrier. And after the war, the ship was used to transport Canadian troops home. And then after that, the ship returned to passenger service until the Great Depression, when I think it was 1930 or 1931, when she was sold for scrap metal. Her bell is still on display on the permanently moored HQS Wellington at Victoria Embankment in London. There were many uses of false flags during both World War I and World War II, but that is one example that was pretty interesting to me because of how the ship was disguised. The ship it was disguised as actually came along and destroyed it. And that was the Trafalgar's first military engagement. So it didn't work because, the Carmani is like, wait a minute, something's not right with this ship. Something looks suspicious here. That can't be them. That's us. But yeah, there are many, many examples you could use from World War One. But for me, that was the most interesting. And that ship has a really interesting story beyond this particular incident. And I feel like somebody really needs to make a movie about this ship, like maybe James Cameron or somebody. So, hey, if you're listening and you know James Cameron, he's really good at making movies about ships. So tell him about this one. And I think it's a fascinating story, just waiting for a filmmaker to pick up and make into some kind of summer blockbuster. Not just about this battle, but about like the whole story of the ship. It's pretty interesting. And it has sort of a tragic ending because, the ship is sold for scrap because of an economic collapse that was possibly engineered by bankers. But that's a whole other episode. All right, speaking of wars, World War II, Pearl Harbor. Was it a false flag? Not exactly, but some people think that the United States allowed the Japanese to attack to gain popular support for the United States to enter the war. Because in the United States, we did the whole World War I thing. We went over there and partied with Europe, and nobody wanted any part of that again. I mean, just the horrors of World War I. I think because of what happened during World War II World War II was pretty wild with the concentration camps, with, the nuclear warfare, with Germany's bizarre weapons that they developed, everything from big giant cannons to, jet fighters rocket fighters, really, to the V-2 rockets, the first manned object, or not first man-made object. That was what I meant to say. First man-made object in space. The horrors of the German invasion on Russia, where, God, I remember seeing online some kind of stat that like 20 million Russians died in that event. Like it's pretty bananas. World War II was pretty bananas, but I think it kind of eclipses World War I in some ways. We don't really remember it, but World War I was no walk in the park either, with the gas being used and the trench combat and all that stuff. I mean, that was hell on earth. And the United States, most people, that was in our living memory. Everybody knew somebody or had gone there themselves to fight. These were back in the days where we used mass troop tactics. For World War II, pretty much every able-bodied man of a certain age went to fight in the war. Everybody did. Except for people who were physically unable to do so or were beyond a certain age. So World War II, the United States wanted nothing to do with it. But when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, a surprise attack that nobody saw coming, or did they, that convinced people that, yeah, okay, I guess we're involved now. Let's go get them. And then, of course, everything happened the way it did. But there's a lot of people who think that Pearl Harbor, while not exactly a false flag because it was definitely the Japanese, there does seem to be some evidence that they knew about the attack before it was going to happen, but they allowed it to happen because the U.S. government and certainly the military-industrial complex, which was not the same thing then as it is now, by any means, but probably there were some people, even in business, who would benefit from it, who wanted to get into the war. So there is a theory that they allowed it to happen. Now, I haven't done the deep dive on this. That's just the conspiracy, is that it was allowed to happen. I've looked into it a little bit. There does seem to be a little bit of evidence, but I'm going to save that for like a whole episode because I haven't done the deep dive into this topic to have an opinion on it. But I did want to mention it because it's one of the bigger ones, which we're sort of using the term false flag loosely here, but it's one of the bigger events that a lot of people talk about it. So I just wanted to mention it at the very least. But yeah, I'm sure we'll do an episode on that sooner or later. All right, let's go back a little further in history. Like I said, these events go back probably, if you look through all of written history, this goes back even to the Roman times. Even they might not have called it false flag attacks, but probably these sorts of things have happened throughout human history. But here's one from the Russo-Swedish War, which, to be honest, I was not even really familiar with. This war happened from 1788 to 1790. So in 1788, the Swedish king, Gustav III, wanted war with Russia, but did not have the constitutional authority to initiate the war. He needed the Swedish parliament's approval. The head tailor at the Royal Swedish... This gets weird, right? Head tailor? What are you talking about? So the head tailor at the Royal Swedish Opera was commissioned to make some Russian military uniforms, and on June 27th, the Swedish border outpost of Pumala, Puumala, was attacked by unidentified forces dressed in Russian uniforms. Now, we don't necessarily have the historical documentation to say this was definitely a false flag and the King Gustav III was definitely behind it, but we do have evidence such as the tailor making the uniforms and the circumstances. Like, it doesn't make sense for Russia to attack them at this time in this area. So this one is almost certainly a false flag. Anyways, when news of the attack hit the presses, or whatever they had back then. Wait, when was the printing press invented? Let's see. I think that was like the 1500s. I have to Google this now. Printing press. It's hard to discipline yourself when you have the world's knowledge, or at least some semblance of the world's knowledge at your fingertips. Oh my God. So Gutenberg, yeah, I remember the name of the guy. Around 1440, Gutenberg invented the printing press. So that's actually even older than I thought. Wow. All right. It's been around a long time. So they did have the press at this time. So anyways, the news hits the press. See this? Hey, this podcast is educational. You learn something listening to this stuff. So anyways, the news hits the press, and that sparked outrage in Sweden, and it swayed public opinion in favor of war. The Swedish parliament approved the military action against Russia, and then they went to war. So the whole war was based on a false flag attack orchestrated by King Gustav III. Now, there's a whole lot of context to these things. Why did he want to go to war? What was going on politically at the time? There's a whole lot of background. Like I said, each one of these incidences could probably be an episode in and of itself, but I don't know if we want to go into that much history in detail. Maybe we do, but on the other hand, like I said, I wanted to do a whole bunch of incidents on this one because it's kind of more fun. But I guess historians still kind of debate the topic a little bit, but it seems to be pretty much a slam dunk false flag, at least for a conspiracy theorist for me. All right, so a false flag does not always involve a physical attack. There's an interesting case from July 13th, 1870, when Otto von Bismarck published the EMS dispatch, which was an internal communication from King Wilhelm I to Bismarck about demands made by a French ambassador. So this is like pre-unified Germany, and what they were trying to do was unify Germany. The public version of this dispatch was altered, making it seem like the king had insulted the ambassador. So what they were trying to do here is piss off the French, and it worked. Napoleon declared war on the North German Confederation, with the basic end result being the unification of the German states. That was the original goal of Otto von Bismarck. Man, what a genius move, right? He accidentally, quote unquote, accidentally leaks an internal dispatch that was supposedly a communication where he fakes that the king had insulted the ambassador, and then that pisses off the French, who then declare war, saving them the problem of trying to do that themselves, allowing them to unify, German, just like, the famous saying is, what was the exact quote from President Reagan when he was talking about aliens? If there was some outside force, then we would probably become friends pretty quickly, kind of a deal. He's talking about aliens. I forget the exact wording, but you know what I'm talking about. Well, that's how it worked in this case. They have an outside force attacking them, so they had to band together for their own mutual survival. It's pretty genius move on Otto von Bismarck's part there. But also, a lot of people ended up dying, so I don't know. Anyways, again, that's a whole other thing. Like, it'd be cool to do an episode on that incident because, who were these people? What were the moving parts in this? Why were the German states not unified? Why did they become German? There's just so many questions that, but I mean, I think that kind of gets a little far afield of what this podcast is, which is, this is about conspiracies and whatnot, not necessarily history. But still, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go read up on that incident. July 13th, 1870, Otto von Bismarck, the EMS dispatch. That it's just a really, really fascinating case. All right. Up next, there is strong evidence that the Soviet Union used a false flag attack in 1939 as a pretext to invade Finland. And this is known as the shelling of Manila, Mainila, Manila. I want to say Manila, M-A-N, but it's Manila. Manila. All right, so this was November 26, 1939, on Manila, which was a village on the Soviet side of the border near Finland. The Soviets claimed that Finnish forces had shelled Manila, resulting in Soviet casualties. But the Finland said, well, no, that wasn't us. Why would we bomb you guys? We can do an investigation and stuff, but it wasn't us. And the Soviets said, nope, talk to the hand. You crossed that line. You killed our people. It's game on, The reported number of casualties that the Soviets reported seem a little excessive for the scale of the attack that was supposedly launched, and Finnish witnesses near the area said that the shells landed well inside the Soviet territory, suggesting that maybe that the Soviets were launching on themselves from within their own territory. And the international community was not super convinced of the attack. There were a lot of people that were very, very skeptical, especially because the two countries had ongoing territorial disputes. But nonetheless, just 4 days later, the Soviet Union launched a full-scale invasion of Finland, starting the Winter War. But despite superior numbers, the Soviets faced fierce Finnish resistance and suffered heavy losses. The war ultimately ended in March 1940 with Finland ceding territory to the Soviet Union. The shelling of Manila is an interesting, it's kind of like a textbook example of a false flag operation, and it's interesting to me that it's a justification. It's I don't know, it's weird. Like, imagine you're all sitting around the lunch table and nobody's looking directly at you, and then you say, "Ow, this dude just hit me on the arm," or whatever, and then you get in a fist fight with that guy, and it doesn't really matter that much if he really hit you on the arm once the fist fight begins, right? I don't know. It's such a strange thing that this is so effective, you know, because it's like nobody else wants to be involved in that beef. What is the United States going to go way over there to Europe and be like, don't do that? Like, no, we're not going to get involved. Nobody else over there wants to get involved. So just be like, well, I guess they're at war now. You know, it's so bizarre. But yeah, like I said, these things are false flags are very common, more common than you might suspect throughout history. All right, now this is one of my favorite ones up next that I think I've mentioned this before on the show, but what the hell, I'll mention it again, and that's Operation Northwoods. Now, this was a proposed false flag that it didn't actually go through, but they had plans in place to make this happen, and this was in 1962. So I'm not going to call this modern, but the world was a very different place in the 1800s. By 1962, the world looked a lot more like it does today than it did in 1862. So we have automobiles, we have airports, and we have, more modern politics. The monarchy has lost a lot of its power by this time, and we're dealing with the United States has come up as a superpower. It's the height of the Cold War, as it always is. So anyways, we have a little problem in the United States at this time, and the problem is Cuba, because Cuba is communist, and they are, a potential Soviet outpost. And if you're not aware, if you're a good swimmer, you could swim from Cuba to the United States. It's that close. Let me see, how many miles is Cuba? How many miles is Cuba to the USA? Distance from the United States. Distance calculator. From Cuba to travel math. The total straight line flight distance from Cuba to the United States is 1,500 miles. What? I thought it was closer than that. I mean, I'm pretty sure people have swum that. Is that right? Let me look at Google Maps. Well, anyways, it doesn't matter, but even so, even if it is 1,500 miles, I thought it was closer than that. But even if it's not, as far as like a military action goes, that's really close for an enemy to have a base like right next to you. They're pretty much in your backyard. If they want to launch an attack from there, they're going to be able to do so pretty quickly without much warning at all. So that's a huge thorn in the United States side, something that they're constantly worried about. So they came up with a plan to create a pretext for the United States to invade Cuba. Part of this plan was staging fake attacks on U.S. soil or military bases and then blaming those attacks on Cuba. Things like sinking a U.S. ship or drowning a civilian airplane to garner public support for the drowning an airplane. Why did I write that? Drowning, shooting down an airplane is what I'm sure I meant. But shooting down an airplane or raiding military installations with troops disguised as Cuban troops. Now, what is the problem with this? Well, the major problem is that part of the plan was for our government, the United States government, to murder both civilians and military personnel to justify a war with Cuba. Now, does that sound familiar? Are there any more recent events that could possibly have been similar to this? Nah, probably not. So anyways, President JFK was president at the time, John F. Kennedy. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. He looked at the plan and he said, "What?" He's like, "No, this is insane." So he vetoed the plan. He rejected it, saying that, it was unethical and potentially disastrous in nature. Like, what if people found out about this? This is just an insane plan, right? So his main objections were obviously harming innocent people. And dude, just imagine, like, the reason why this is so bananas to me is, like, you have people signing up for the military who they say, yes, I am willing to sacrifice my life for the defense of this country, and then you murder those people. That is just, what kind of deranged minds are even capable of formulating such a plan? It's scary. It's actually pretty frightening that these are the types of people in charge. Hopefully other places don't have psychopaths running the show, but we definitely seem to have that here. It's just, man, it's just hard to wrap my head around, to be honest. Anyways, he also believed that there was a high risk of the operation being exposed, which would be, a huge liability for the United States, as far as international reputation goes. And also this could potentially lead to a full-blown war with the Soviet Union as sort of a domino effect. So that it actually did not happen because it got vetoed. But the Operation Northwoods itself was classified until the year 2000. And when it was declassified, of course, people said, "What the fuck?" But this is an important historical reminder of the lengths that some governments might consider going to achieve their political objectives. And I've spoken about things before, like the Nixon case, the Watergate. I think that was a bonus episode, but either way. And it also, it's important to, like, use critical thinking, but I mean, to be honest, let's be real. If you're just like an average person, you don't have access to the information to even evaluate these things. What are you going to believe? And, if Americans get killed, the instant reaction is one of outrage. And I'm sure, if you're listening to this from another place, if your country, men and women, got killed, you would probably feel the same way. You're not going to just sit back and think, well, now hold on, 300 people got murdered. Let's think about this critically. No, that's not really how people tend to react. And that's why false flags tend to be so successful, I suppose. All right. Up next, we have, this one's crazy. All right. Operation Ajax, also known as the CIA Anglo-Iranian coup d'etat of 1953, aka whoops, or aka unintended consequences. Though I added those last two. This was a covert operation orchestrated by the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the British Secret Intelligence Service to overthrow the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammed Mossadegh. Mossadegh? I'm not sure. You guys know I suck at pronouncing names. It's not on purpose. I apologize. Anyways, so why would they want to assassinate this guy? Let's skip all of the historical context, but basically, the President Mossadegh nationalized Iran's oil industry. It had been owned by British oil interests. So British oil companies basically took all the oil from Iran, kept the money, and did not give any of that money to the people of it. Maybe a little bit, a few sprinkles here and there, but the lion's share of the money they definitely kept for themselves. Now, Mossadegh came in and said, dude, this is bullshit. You're taking our shit. So I could have probably worded that better. But anyways, you're taking our stuff. And he nationalized Iran's oil industry, basically saying, no, we're going to keep this resource for ourselves, and you guys can go kick rocks, eh? So he did that. And then, of course, the Western powers are like, we can't allow them to take our money. They're just like people in the Middle East. They don't deserve money. We get all the stuff. We are the ones who deserve all the money. So, anyways, the US and Britain saw this action as a threat to their economic interests, and they were worried about a domino effect that could inspire other oil producing countries. So they had to send a message. Because, yeah, you know, in case you're not aware, this was not an isolated incident in Iran. This was actually pretty much a worldwide phenomenon where the United States basically at one point, what was the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States said, all right, this half of the world is ours. You guys are not allowed to touch it. And we get this half, you guys stay on your half. We will exploit this half, you guys exploit that half, and everybody will stay happy. We don't have to fight each other, right? That was basically the idea. So it was a common tactic to go into places like Iran, where they did not necessarily have the modern warfare capability that Europe or the United States had, take over those countries, using some trumped up excuse, and then exploit their natural resources. Pretty much every major Western power did this at some point or other, and some of them continue to do it to this day. You wonder why some parts of the world are so ridiculously poor. Well, this is a big part of it, because if a nation does not have control over its own natural resources, then that severely limits their economic possibilities. And, I don't want to get in, that's a whole other topic, but it's also kind of depressing. But anyways, let's get back to false flags. So the CIA and SIS funneled money and weapons to an Iranian opposition group, including royalists and military leaders. And they also launched a massive propaganda campaign to undermine Mossadegh's government, saying that he was a communist sympathizer despite him being a nationalist. And the goal was to basically sow unrest and incite a coup, I should say, to replace him with a leader more favorable to Western interests. So in August 1953, with backing from the CIA-funded and influenced military, pro-Shah forces staged a coup. Key figures in Mossadegh's government were arrested, and eventually Mossadegh was caught and arrested himself. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had previously fled Iran, fearing for his throne, but he was reinstated as the country's ruler. Now, you might think, whatever, no big deal, but actually this had long-lasting effects, which is why, earlier I said Operation Whoops. It was initially considered, Operation Ajax was initially considered to be a success, but because, they got their oil back. They said, all right, we get our money back. Sweet. Because, money is way more important than, like things like human life or, national sovereignty, things like that. But the long-term consequences were significant. The Shah's authoritarian rule fueled resentment and ultimately contributed to the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which overthrew the monarchy and established an Islamic republic. And to this day, the government or the people, the nation of Iran, they are not friends with the United States. We don't get along at all. In fact, they would destroy us if they could. So we created a long-term enemy and a long-term problem. And if you're looking at this from the outside as an objective observer, it's hard to, no, I'm just kidding. It's not hard. We definitely look like the bad guys here. There's really no way to frame this where the United States look like the good guys, right? Or the Western powers look like the good guys here. And, as they say, you reap what you sow. It's seen as a blatant example of Western interference. And this is a big reason, one of the contributing reasons for the ongoing instability in the area. Some people say it was necessary to prevent Iran from falling under communist influence, but that's basically BS. All right, and the last one I have today is the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. This is probably the most prominent and well-known example. Agent ETA was going to do this one, but like I said, he's unable to come on the show. So what the heck? I'll do a quick summary. The United States was already advising South Vietnam in their fight against North Vietnam, but they wanted a more active role. So, on August 2nd and 4th in 1964, U.S. Navy destroyers USS Maddox and USS Turner Joy reported being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Tonkin Gulf. Of course, the U.S. public was outraged. How dare they attack us? And President Lyndon B. Johnson used the incident as a justification for retaliatory airstrikes against North Vietnam. And this was, of course, the escalation that basically got us knee deep in the war that would eventually, lead to a lot more conflict in the future. There were discrepancies in the details of the attacks reported by the Navy commanders, and some historians believe that the second attack might not have actually happened. And declassified documents in later years raised questions about whether North Vietnamese forces actually initiated the attacks, or if they were accidental encounters or misinterpretations. So there is some haziness around it, but basically it was a false flag that the United States used to get into the Vietnam War. And if you know about the history of that was a whole can of worms in and of itself. So that's a short version of the Gulf of Tonkin. I would have done a longer version of it, but ETA canceled at the last minute, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare notes. But that's a really interesting one. I mean, easily a case file in and of itself. So if you're interested in false flags, that's like a really well-known one. Go check out that one. All right, well, thanks everybody so much for listening. A little on the short side, a tiny bit, but just here by my lonesome. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, keep it strange.